I'm John Travis in Novato, California on the 28th of March, 2020, talking to Elliott Dacher on Martha's Vineyard, and the town again is
Aquina.
Ah, and we have known each other for 44 years, I think. I think it was 76 when you came to Mill Valley, and we began a long distance, long time relationship. And you have but then you were working for, I think you were already at Kaiser, yeah. And then you went off on your own and you've written books and all these things that you've become known for. But I want to go back to your roots and what led you to become a weird doctor like me and so many others who have been pushing the wellness envelope for 40 some years. So starting with where you were born, siblings, did you play doctor as a kid, that kind of thing?
I was born in New York and Brooklyn, spent my life in Queens. I have a sister who's no longer with us. And that's where I went to school until I finished college at Queens College at City University in New York. And then I left to go to medical school at that point. So what is it that causes anybody to go in any direction? I mean, who really knows? There certainly was a sense of curiosity and awe, and a little sense of concern about our social and cultural situation when I was a child, a young teenager, I should say. So I think my concerns and my interest and my curiosity and my awe and my sense of wondering what's under the next rock were there really from the beginning. So I don't know they had much to do with me. They could have expressed themselves in different ways, but I think the tendency was there. In college, I look at what I was most interested in, and it was philosophy and a bit in psychology, particularly philosophy.
Uh-huh.
So this question about how things work within us and who we are and where we go has always been there. And, it stepped into different forms at different times, but the thread has always been there. And so my sense it's something I brought into this world.
Were you any doctors in the family or any relatives or friends that influenced you in medicine?
No, not really. My parents were both immigrants and worked really hard to just keep food on the table.
You're second
And that was
generation.
their, I'm sorry,
You're second generation from where did your parents immigrate
I'm
from?
first generation. My parents weren't born here.
Oh, okay. I think of second. You're right. Yes. Where were they born?
My father in Romania and my mother in Poland. And they came over around 1910 or so.
Ah,
Uh, and so much of their life was spent, I mean, their whole life really was spent here except their early childhood. So no, I think they're very busy working, so they didn't really terribly intend to directing me in this direction or another, which is probably very fortunate. So I had not a whole lot of conditioning about where to go or what to become. I remember early on reading a book called Not as a Stranger. It was about a family doctor. And something about that touched me and interested me. But I think as I grew up, there were a number of other influences. One, I wanted a really sure way out of the kind of insecurity financially that my parents had. And that certainly was a motivating factor. Also, I had an aversion to the thought of being a businessman or a lawyer.
oh.
So that ruled out two fields, and science may have been the one that would have been the alternative, although it certainly was not my area of interest. So, there was some of my, innate disposition, some of my family circumstances. Um,
Now, your sister, was she older, younger?
my sister was older than me by 5 years, and she passed away about 12 years ago from cancer.
Uh-huh. How was your relationship?
I think it was a decent relationship. She was 5 years older than me, and in our family situation, that was a generation away.
Yeah.
She was in, so she was in college when I started high school, high school when I was finishing elementary school. So, but over the years, we were okay. We were together, not living together in terms of the same area, but share time and space. And we talk with each other. And the last year of her life, last 6 months of her life, I lived with her and her husband pretty much during her illness.
Oh,
So we left quite intimate. It was a good relationship.
oh, good. And what was school like for you? Grade school? Were you a big man on campus, class president, or a nerd like me, or what?
Probably closer to that. um, no, I went to a local elementary school, which is actually a lovely experience, lovely place to go to. I didn't go to the high school I probably would have wanted to go to because of zoning and other kinds of um, circumstances, and that was not a particularly good experience for me. College was a live at home college, and it was just hard work trying to get into medical school because there were a lot more brighter people than me that were trying to do the same thing. So that was 4 years of a lot of work. The summers were spent making some income so I could pay the small tuition that I had to pay there. So it was a busy time. I don't think it was a particularly good time. And the medical school up at SUNY Buffalo, uh, you know, they recently keep on sending me notes to go to their 50th um, class reunion, and I realized that I didn't really like many of my classmates back then. I can't imagine why I would want to share another experience with them. It was okay. I went through it and worked hard and spent a lot of time with a classmate working on setting up a neighborhood health center in Lackawanna, New York, working with the school and the public health department. This is an impoverished area. It was really a wonderful experience. That's how I spent most of my time in medical school. We eventually got it set up and opened. It's just hard for a public health department and medical school to say no to eager, altruistic students. So we actually did get it open, did run.
How did you make that connection?
Well, there was a friend of mine there in medical school, and together I don't recall what got us into this project, to tell you the truth, but we got into it in some way or other, and pursued it for a year or two, and then it actually happened. Public health department opened a clinic there. Medical school put some students there. So that was a lot of my energy really in medical school. I did okay. I wasn't particularly care whether I got good grades or not. I just wanted to get through.
Now, was that related to Jack Geiger, who started the old neighborhood health center project? And he was in our preventive medicine department.
No,
It was,
no, I can't think about what it was, what animated that. I really don't know.
uh-huh.
Obviously something, because it was a community that I would not have normally had an interaction with. It was the old steel mill community in down by the river in Buffalo. So I don't know what got that going. I really don't.
It was a major thing along with civil rights and so forth. And I was at the first one in Boston that I think was the first one in the world that Jack Geiger set up called Columbia Point, which was this horrible housing development that people came from all over the world to see how not to do a housing department and I mean a housing development. And it was truly a slum. But now, UMass and the Kennedy Library are out there, so it's upscale, but not like there. And then the Hong Kong flu hit. I got it the month I was there, and our diagnosis was, did you feel like you wanted to die? And if it said yes, then it was the Hong Kong flu. But
Yeah, interesting. Well, now that I think about it, that thread really continued because after my year of internship, 1970-71, mine was the first group of interns or physicians in general that was actually drafted after the Korean War. It was only one group. It was my group of interns. So I became a conscientious objector and ended up spending 2 years doing alternative service in an impoverished health center in Boston, in Jamaica Plain in Boston, a neighborhood health center, model city center. So it's interesting as I think about it, how that, continued itself.
interesting, yeah. So I joined the public health service at that time because Vietnam was big. I didn't have the guts to go CO, though one of my class actual interns, having uh, been in the public health service, then went CO, and it was a major shift, but he pulled it off. So after your 2 years with in Jamaica Plain, what transpired?
Well, I worked there 2 years, and as strange things tend to happen in one. That clinic was run by the Peter Ben Brigham Hospital,
Hmm.
now Brigham and Women's Hospital, one of the three Harvard teaching hospitals. And the chief of medicine, Gene Braunwald, world noted cardiologist, who I didn't know. I got a call from his office one day. They said, "Why don't you come in? He wants to talk to you." And I never met him before. And I did. And he said, Harvard is starting a new primary care internal medicine track. 2 people from the Brigham, 2 from the Mass General, and 2 from the Beth Israel. Would you like to be in the program? Because I had to finish my residency. I hadn't done it yet. And I was kind of a crazy invitation because I never saw myself at Harvard, frankly.
Yeah.
But I took it up. And so I spent 2 years on the Harvard rotations at the Brigham. Met great people. Met Bernie Lown, who,
Oh.
famous cardiologist, started the first coronary care unit in the world at the Brigham, invented the defibrillator. And I didn't know anything about him. He was my attending on the first time run through the CCU. And I remember him saying to me, "I've never seen anybody in the coronary care unit who hasn't had depression in 6 to 18 months before they came here." I thought, wow, that's pretty neat for somebody that's had this kind of distinguished medical career. And so I would follow him around to his rounds and to his fellow rounds and just watch and listen. Never really knew him personally. 2 years after I left, he won the Nobel Peace Prize with a Russian physician for his establishment of a group called the International Physicians Against Nuclear War. So I had those kinds of opportunities at Harvard, even though it was quite strange being there because I didn't really have the skills or the brights that most of the kids did, the interns and residents. But I met great people, and it was a great opportunity. So that's how I finished my time in Boston.
So where did you live? I'm curious because I lived in Boston Med School.
I lived in Brookline, near Coolidge Corner.
Oh, okay. And my ex-wife was teaching at the Pierce School in Brookline, which would have been near there. Yeah. Um, so after your 2-year residency, what then?
Then I went to move to Washington, D.C., to the suburbs, Reston, Virginia, for my first real job, which was at a clinic run by Georgetown University Health Plan, which later, 2 years later, became Kaiser Health Plan. And this was in Reston, in the community that I lived in and basically walked to work in for many, many years. My kids grew up there, went to school there. So it was my first job afterwards. So for the first couple of years I worked there, then Kaiser took it over. I became a physician administrator of that particular facility for the next 8 years. Practiced half-time internal medicine, half-time running the place.
I didn't realize you were an administrator, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Oh,
for viewers who may not know, Reston was one of the first, if not the first, planned community in the United States, just outside to the west of DC. And I actually lived in Columbia, which copied Reston in some ways, only before the energy crisis. And so it was the size of Manhattan and you had to drive everywhere. I loved visiting you in Reston. It was really sweet, built right on the water there, and
yeah.
great.
It's a really sweet place. It's, of course, grown up now.
Yeah, right.
It's a much larger metropolis. When I went there were just a few thousand people. It was just starting. So I did that 10 years at basically Kaiser Health Plan. And then it became time to leave. It's a little complicated situation, but it became time to leave. My last 2 years I was at Kaiser, they asked me to develop a wellness center, not a wellness center, a wellness program for their Mid-Atlantic region, which was 4 or 5 different centers. So they gave me a full-time job doing that, although I knew that was probably the end of my time there. And I did for 2 years, get a chance to interview a lot of very interesting people, and started a wellness program that went to the 4 or 5 centers. But after that, a number of things happened that last year, my divorce, and then the leaving Kaiser, where I could have stayed, but it just wasn't right anymore. They offered me a very substantial package, a full salary for a year, and I decided it was a good time to leave. And so I did. But it's kind of interesting, and I'll share with you how that happened. As I say, I could have stayed, would have been in practice full time there. And I asked a lot of friends, what should I do? Should I stay or should I go? Go meant I didn't have an income until I found the job, and I'd have to decide what job I wanted to do, maybe uproot myself. And I asked a lot of people. One of them was a very dear friend, Patch Adams, who you know.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time playing and doing things together many years. And couldn't figure out what to do. So one day I got up in the morning and I said, put all those people who told you to stay on the left side of your visual field, which is everybody except Patch. And so I got Patch, who told me to just go. He said his fear is not anything else. Everything will work out. On my right side. And then I said, which lifestyle do I want to live? It was so obvious. I didn't quite want to live Patch's lifestyle, but it was much closer to what was me. So I left and went into the unknown for about 9 to 10 months, into a very, very difficult, dark time related to a variety of things: the end of my relationship, the end of that job, the loss essentially of my identity. And it was a very difficult time, but I had done some work with June Houston and others before, and I had Joseph Campbell's wonderful path of the hero's journey. And although it was dark, I knew it would be light at the end of that whole process, and something new would open for me. And so I went through my first major transition, which I just actually published as a book about a year ago, even though I wrote it back then 35 more years ago.
Oh, really? I missed that.
I published that myself. It's a tiny little book. So so that's what happened in my Kaiser experience. And then after that, I went into full-time practice by myself for 10 years, which gave me an opportunity to explore practice styles, to explore integrating some other more, I don't want to use the complimentary form, but I would say wellness-based kind of practices into my practice. It was some meditation. It was some little biofeedback, I believe, and imagery and a bunch of other things. I started doing counseling at that point in my practice. I was very interested in psychological development. Spent some time with all the developmental psychologists, Maslow, Erickson, and the rest of them. And so it was a period of 10 years of real exploration for me of what practice could be like if I was just doing it without having to worry about anybody over my shoulder.
And where was that, in Reston?
That was in Reston as well.
So you had an office with just yourself? Did you have staff? What was your...
I had an office in the medical office building at Reston, the hospital office building. I purposely had very little staff. My daughters are coming over the weekend to file. People usually came in. They knew they would sit down. I'd come out, invite them in when I was ready for them, and I scheduled that so nobody really had to wait. I tended to do the phone calls myself, so people knew not to call unless they had something serious, because I was going to answer. I did the cardiograms myself. I found the more things I did myself, the more contact I had with people.
Interesting.
And less overhead I had. So I had about a 30% overhead, which allowed me to spend more time with people. Plus the activities I did, like taking cardiograms and so on, allowed me more time with people. So I was able to establish a practice which was less intense, which gave me a reasonable income, which I could spend more time with people, and didn't really require more staff.
Sounds like a concierge practice before they existed.
Well, except people were using insurance and paying very modest prices,
Yeah.
which is not the concierge style.
True, yeah. So how long would you spend with a patient on average then?
Well, depending on what they mean. I mean, some people would come in with minor colds and sore throats, and it was reasonably. I mean, these are people I knew over years, So it wasn't that I had to review a whole history or I
Right.
didn't have a relationship. So if it was a minor problem, it could be 15 minutes. If it was something more elaborate, it could be half an hour. So I learned how to creatively bill. You could create an extended visit, which is 45 minutes. And I could do stress management or meditation and yet bill it under hypertension. Diabetes, why not? It was a
Uh-huh.
treatment for that disease also, as well as I saw it. So some creative billing helped. But I spent considerable period of time with people. There was no rush.
Yeah. And biofeedback, how
I
did,
did a little bit of that, not very much. I think that was around the, no, I had visited you many years before that. So I did some biofeedback. I think there was a lot of meditation, stress management, counseling, guided imagery. I didn't really venture into alternative therapies. I never really had a strong interest in those.
uh-huh.
So nothing, no problems with them. They just didn't interest me. I was less interested in the mechanics and methods and treatments than I was in understanding a person's illness from the inside out
Yeah.
and working through that understanding. So I saw for me doing alternative therapy, whether it's acupuncture or Ayurveda or whatever, would have been just being another professional with another outfit on in an authority position and basically using some methods to fix somebody else. Nothing was learned, nothing was grown, nothing changed. So I had really very little interest in that.
Yeah, my interview with Bill Manahan, he talked a lot about the importance of going upstream instead of fixing the problem presently. Look at the source and going upstream at the environment. And it sounds like you're doing the same thing, that it's not about the treatment, it's about the environment and identifying it. So let's go back to when we met in this picture. I think it was 76. And I remember we had lunch at Davoud's near my center. And I hadn't met many doctors who were not, mainstream. I was fairly new with the wellness center. And you were a shock to me in many ways. Like, wow. First of all, because I had some Midwestern WASP negative experiences in Boston with New Yorkers and East Coast uh, guys. Your accent put me off because I thought, oh, he's going to be one of them, and you weren't. That was the shock. Is like, you got it. So I had to readjust some of my prejudgments about East Coast high-powered docs. And I remember we really connected over lunch. And I must have brought you back over to the center and walked you around. Do you remember?
Yes, I do remember walking around your center. I've got two daughters, and you've met them, and they always remember the guy with two socks eating a bowl of Cheerios with grape juice in it.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, they don't forget about it. I remember having a picture of that actually at my dining room table. So, yes, and interestingly, my wife moved down to San Diego where my girls were, so I was in the area, same area this summer. I haven't been around for maybe 15, 20 years. And did see her with a husband and the kids, and it was fine. A little bit strange, but other than that, perfectly fine.
Now, at least one of your daughters was living with you when I visited. And just for the readers, I had a creative thing of wearing two different colored socks, but they were complementary colors, and they both were Argyle designs. But it just seemed to me foolish to, not waste the colors. So that was what he's referring to of two socks. They were different socks. And I discovered that milk and I didn't do that well. So fruit juice worked just fine for cereal, but it was a little weird. So
my kids still remembered.
Now, I remember the apartment, and one daughter was there. Were they both there at the time?
The oldest one was with me from pretty much after my divorce through high school, and she lived with me full time. The other one lived a few blocks away, was there 3 or 4 times a week. So I pretty much had total contact with one and not far from it with the other from most years.
And the other one was with her mother nearby.
2 or 3 blocks away.
Uh-huh.
So she could walk because she was able to walk an underpass underneath
Uh-huh.
the road. And so she was over, I probably think maybe 3 times a week. So I had a pretty close relationship with her as well.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, my relationship with my children after my divorce went from my busyness, in which I wasn't that involved, to getting very, very closely involved and having a wonderful, wonderful experience with them.
I remember that. I was impressed. Yeah.
So that was a positive outcome.
So you had the 10-year practice, and then then what?
Then my oldest daughter and my youngest daughter were through college. The month my youngest daughter, a year before my youngest daughter finished college, I decided I was finished with practicing medicine the way I was practicing it full time. Someone once told me Charles de Gaulle said one of the most important things in life is to know when an end is an end.
Mm-hmm.
I felt a deep sense of completion. And part of it came because I came to terms with the fact that I had satisfied whatever my childhood needs were for financial security, for my responsibilities to my children. And I didn't feel that medicine, as I was practicing it, was right for me. I didn't feel it had meaning. I didn't feel I had deep enough, could delve deep enough with people, not because of my practice, but because of where I had gone in my own life. And I felt I needed to go deeper in my own life. I felt that I achieved what I set out to achieve, but I didn't feel particularly happy or particularly accomplished at that point. So I decided to raise a flag of victory and to say I've done, I've accomplished what I set out to accomplish. There's no more here for me to do. And so I spent a year, well, before my youngest daughter was finishing, reading all the books on self-development and all of those people all over again. And coming to a place where I understood what was next. So I understood it was over, but I didn't know what to do next. And
Now,
then
was
I
this
came
when
to,
you did Gene Houston Mystery School? Is that how?
yeah, I actually was the one who raised my hand one day in a Gene Houston workshop and said, why don't you do this like a mystery school? And she did it the next year as a year mystery school, and I went to the first year-long mystery school. That
Interesting.
was before this was it was right before my divorce. It was actually what got me out of my marriage.
Uh-huh.
I was really clear from Gene's teachings that there were places I needed to go that I couldn't go in my marriage. So when I started to look at what's next before I left, because I had a year to go till my daughter was finished, I realized that all my reading told me one fundamental thing, that you don't make change by rearranging furniture in the same room. That is, I think I'll do this, or I think I'll do that, or I'll work from here, or I'll work half time, or whatever. It's kind of a safety mechanism not to have to jump off the other end. But the way you make change is you go into the unknown and you sit in it. Whatever comfort or discomfort is there, until out of that rises what's next. And so I decided to do that, not knowing where I was going, what I was doing, where my next dollar came from. And I wasn't wealthy by any stretch. So I put everything in my car, eventually sold my home, gave much of my furniture to my children, came up to the vineyard where I had a home, which I didn't use a whole lot. And I started to live here. The only thing I did really was spend 3 months each winter at the Institute of Noetic Science at that time in Sausalito as a fellow, doing a variety of projects. The second year, I was rooming in a philanthropist's house with a fellow named Asmit Goswami. He was in, what was that movie that we all liked? It'll come to me in a minute. But a physicist from Eugene, an Indian fella, and he would cook Indian food every night. We'd talk about health and consciousness and physics and healing, night after night for 3 months. And at the end of that period of time, he said, my new wife, I'm going to see her parents in Bangalore in India. Why don't you come? We'll give you a soft landing. We'll pick you up at the airport, take care of you for a while, then you can go on your own. I said, why not? I got nothing else to do. I don't know what's next. And so a month or two later, there I was in the airport in Bangalore, my first trip to India. And after spending a week or so with my friends, I began to head off to the holy and sacred sites in India, where many of the teachers were, and then eventually Kathmandu. And one stop was up in Dharamsala, where, of course, the Dalai Lama is and the Tibetan people in exile are. And I got to see him up close quite a few times, and many other Tibetan people, teachers. And I saw in his face and on their face what I was looking for.
Mm.
A certain kind of peace, a certain kind of serenity, this happiness. You look at the Dalai Lama's face, you see some kind of a joy that's just there. Who knows where it comes from? Well, I know where it comes from now, but who knows where it comes from? A wisdom, a kindness, patience. I said, well, remember that movie that they're sitting in a luncheonette and she has an ice cream or something and she kind of makes this sound like she's having an orgasm, and her friend at the next table says, give me what you gave her. I think that was Harry and Sally.
When Harry Met Sally.
Yeah.
That was Rob Reiner's mother who actually asked that question.
Robbie. So I looked at them and I said, they've got what I want, so I better come here and find out how they got there. I spent the next 12 years of my life, 3 to 6 months a year in Dharamsala, eventually in Kathmandu as well, studying with teachers philosophy, psychology, Tibetan philosophy, psychology, as well as the variety in meditation practices. So that was a lot of time. It was basically my life for 12 years. Longest stretch, I say, was 6 months, but all the others were 3 or 4 months. And when I came back, I did at one point start writing, but a lot of it was just continuing the reading and the practicing. And there came a time when that phase of life came to an end as well. But it certainly shifted me from practicing as a conventional physician, which I, by the way, highly respect, to practicing as a physician whose work was done inside rather than outside. The basic idea of the work was the same. It was to bring suffering to an end and to enhance people's well-being, thriving, flourishing wellness. So I never saw myself as different than practicing, other than a practicing physician. I just changed the aspect of my practice. Of course, others don't quite get those subtleties. It's always, why'd you retire? What are you doing? So I slowly began to shift out of that after 12 and a half years, not after my studying and my practices in terms of meditation and Eastern philosophy and psychology. That continues to this date. But I started writing, started teaching, I started counseling in that direction.
Now, let me get back up here and correlate. Now, were you still having the 10-year private practice when you were going to India, or did that
No,
afterwards?
no, I gave that up.
And then
Went into 9 to 10 months of a fairly substantial and dark transition.
Yeah.
And then after that, during that period, I was working for the Institute of Noetic Sciences. That is when I met Amit Goswami, and that's when I ended up going to India. So it was about a year and a half into that process of keeping still in the unknown. And it was correct, because when the time was ready, the unknown gave me India. And I would never expected that. I didn't plan to go there. I had no interest in it.
And I remember the first time you went to India, you freaked out and turned around and left?
Yeah, that was 10 or 12 years earlier. And it's a whole different story. It was during that period of that dark transition. And when you have a lot of chaos going inside you, you don't head off to India, I found.
That's not the place.
It's not the place to be. So I lasted about a day. But I don't put that in my numbers of times I was there for a day or two. When I went back, it was a very different circumstance and a very different person.
What were you doing when you weren't in India during that period?
Walking in nature, meditating, reading, studying, being in the unknown.
So any income producing activity, or?
It got a little tight, to be honest with you. When I left my practice, I thought, well, I can make some money writing books. Well, we both know how lucrative writing books are. Or I can continue my my conferencing and get some income that way. And once you step out of that loop, it's not easy to get back in. So that
Yeah.
didn't pan out. So there were a number of thoughts about how this would all work out, and financially it didn't. There were some very tight times, and I managed to get through them. I managed to pay off my home when I left my home in Reston up here, so I didn't have that.
Hmm.
And I managed to get by. And eventually I became old enough to pick up a little Social Security, more of a counseling practice, a little more teaching.
Hmm.
So, but I was, at that point, I was living quite simply. My needs are very little. So it's easy to live quite simply. So I didn't really have any significant income. And much like you, I managed to make do. Maybe I learned that from you, John, how to just get by and not worry about it.
Yeah, I did a fair amount of worrying until later on, but what Dwayne Elgin's voluntary simplicity uh, made a big difference for me. Some of it was involuntary simplicity, but it got a lot easier when Social Security came in, that's for sure.
Yeah, so that helped also. And I say now between that and some investment income from my IRA and a little, I don't charge much for anything anymore. I do for my counseling, but not for my teaching. I feel it was something that was given to me for free by
Hmm.
people who spent their entire life devoted to and studying the Eastern traditions. And I can get by simply. I don't need a lot of money, so I don't have any desire to people to pay for anything. So I live simply. It's fine. I'm happy doing it. I don't have large needs. And so I managed to get through. But a lot of it was just, letting go and saying, this is what I got to do. And this was what Patch was very helpful for way back when I had to make that decision
Yeah.
about leaving Kaiser. He said, this is not about money. He said, it's about fear.
Hmm.
And that's what's keeping you from leaving. And he was right. And
Yeah.
it's good that I followed his advice.
Now you just came back from San Diego. You were there through the winter. What do you do there?
Well, I don't generally stay on the vineyard in the winter. I have one of my daughters and two children there in San Diego.
Oh, okay.
So I went to basically have some warm weather,
Hmm.
see how I liked it. I'd been there before. Stay with my kids a little bit, rented a place for a period of time. It turned out to be a very quiet place in which I was able to explore some of the things that have interest to me now. Did a lot of active writing, a lot of active reading, and I actually expected to go there. And what I thought would happen was that I'd interact with a lot of communities of interest, meet people, and begin to develop a part-time life there so I could be bi-coastal. Something very strange happened. I noticed after a while that I was just having very little interest in outside things, meeting people, going to movies that weren't interesting, entertaining myself with the distractions or parties or things I didn't need to be at. I found myself very much just being alone, which I often am all the time, but this was a very different kind of aloneness. And I said, wow, you becoming a hermit, maybe this isn't so good. But then I looked at what was happening to me. I was in this tremendous deep sense of contentment and peace and okayness, feeling wonderful, just being with myself, writing, reading, meditating, spending time with my kids, some time with some friends. So I felt the process of a certain kind of renunciation taking place, which is not the kind of abrupt renunciation when one goes to a monastery or a seminary, one shuts off the outer world. This was as the years of all my work inside and my meditation and some recent interests, which I'll share with you in a few moments, I began to come so much intact, in touch with and living within the space of a deeper self, for lack of a better word, that things that interest me, well, that I occupied myself with, because looking back, they kept me from, they were really ways of what we do in the outside world is really often a wandering from thing to thing, phenomenal thing to phenomenal thing, activity to activity, person to person, for the basic longing of security, of happiness, of peace, of serenity. We'll find it here, we'll find it there. Of course, we find it no place because everything is perishable outside. And I think the realization of that very deeply, and now at this time right now with this virus for people to see how quickly everything can fall apart. Quickly. I began to realize this place inside is the only place I can trust. It's the only reliable place. It's the only place that will always be there. And from that place, I can go out and be in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Not through attachment, not through need, not through wandering from my longings, not knowing what I'm longing for. And what I'm longing for is the longer. What the seeker is seeking is the seeker itself. And so I found myself all of a sudden in this wonderful place of innerness that seemed to pervade my experience and took me much away from activities which are not really of direct significance to me. So it was an unusual winter. Now,
Wow.
part of this was prompted Jack, I don't know why I always still call you John, but I do, Jack, by an interest I developed about a year and a half ago when I started reading some of the more recent research into psychedelics. I started going back and reading a lot of literature. One of the things I started with was William James's Varieties of Religious Experience, which I know you know quite well, and many others will also. And I was touched by how he talks about the religious mind as being a consistent set of characteristics, whether it's a shaman, whether it's a Native American on a vision quest, whether it is a priest or a seminarian who has a true religious experience, whether it's the fullness of the completion of meditation for those who get that far, that revelation, that deep transformation, that deep experience and certainty has certain characteristics that are also characteristic of the psychedelic transcendent aspect of the psychedelic experience. And first is the ego dissolution, the disappearance of ego. It just disappears. But all those experiences is lost. It's also lost in more common ways: dance, music, beauty. There are lots of ways to lose oneself and find a sense of flow. But if you don't know what's happening, it's just a moment. So he gave us a map for that. First is ego dissolution, then there's the experience of interconnectedness, then the experience of unity, then an experience that one has with certainty, personal authority, experience a ultimate and final truth about the nature of self and reality. There is the inability to express it in language, and so on. There are 5 or 6 different qualities of it. So it struck me that it was quite interesting that the transcendent aspect of the psychedelic experience, because there are other aspects as well, was another opportunity to touch in to this religious mind, this end of the process of spiritual development, or actually the beginning of being alive. And so I began to do a lot of reading. The books that you would expect, Aldous Huxley book, The Was of Perception, Gerald Hearst's book, Cleansing the Doors of Perception, back down, just many of these books that I had read years ago, except I saw them very differently. And so I decided that I wanted to explore this myself, which I never did much of when I was younger. So I began to have some psilocybin experiences myself, not an extensive number, but enough to provide me with the kind of realizations that I had studied and learned about for so many, many, many years, but was never actually possible for me to directly experience.
Mm.
And those realizations about reality, the nature of reality, the nature of self, which didn't come with fireworks or gongs. They were just this simple, beautiful, profound experience of reality as it is in every single thing during the day. Everything. So everything was seen with the same eyes. Excuse me, not with the same eyes. Everything was seen that was there was the same. I saw people and plants and trees and whatever. But I saw them with a set of different eyes. It's like Krishna says to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, you want to see me. You want to see my spirituality. You want to see the essence of me, the God Krishna. But you can't see those with normal eyes. You have to see them with spiritual eyes, and I'll give you spiritual inner vision. It was that kind of way that I saw that enlightenment is no place else but right here, right now. And everything we see, everything we do, when seen with a clear, pure, open perception without conditioning. That realization I had without any cognition, without any ego around to make any comments about it, over and over for at least a week. And that has changed the way I teach, the way I experience myself, the way I come to life, and what I hold for people. I'm no longer interested in relaxation techniques or even meditation as a relaxation techniques, and haven't for many years. Now I know that there's a process of meditation or non-meditation that's called pointing out, showing and helping a person look at their own mind, at their own self, at their own reality, and learn from one's inner self. You're not learning from a technique, from a book, from an instructor. And that's the kind of process I'm beginning to move into now. So my work has taken another turn in both my life and myself. And this is where my interests lie now. Now, psychedelic drugs cannot stabilize that experience. The intensity goes away, and to some extent there may be some lingering subtle changes or transformations. It requires inner work and inner development to sustain it, maybe even to have that experience. Because when I had the experience, I knew exactly what I was having, likely because of the work I had done. So that's the direction my life is moving in now.
And now this is sounds parallel with Michael Pollan's book and the renewed interest in the legalization and the use of ketamine, which I did back in the 70s as my method of waking up and experiencing that awesome realm. But what do you think of the Pollan book? Are you?
I think it's a great piece of research. It's written very well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that throughout all the research now and all the people who really speak about this intelligently, they speak about the two keys to a session are the set, meaning the mindset or the intention, and the setting, the physical environment.
Mm-hmm.
That is, if you take a particular psychedelic with a recreational environment with the desire to have the pleasure of some kind of recreational experience, that's what you're going to get. You're not going to get a transcendent experience. So if these drugs become recreational, they will probably not help people very much grow inside. So I think its real value is when there's work that's been done, there's continued work that is going to be done, there's a deep intention and the setting that it's done in, and the sitters or the helpers really reflect that intention.
Mm.
If not, there are lots of other things that can happen in that experience that may be fun or pleasurable, but it's over, it's over. So it's really a waste of time. So, so that's where it's going now, which is a long place where my physician nature started. But you know, it's not like this isn't the practice of a physician. I mean,
yeah,
these natural plants have been used, as you know, for millennia in all kinds of cultures, all kinds of great religious traditions. Probably many of the great recorded religious experiences were a result of ingestion of natural botanicals. So it's not surprising that whether you call it the healing work of a shaman or of a religious person or of a physician, the essence is all the same. It's to introduce people to the essence of their life so they're not subject to the influences of the constantly changing and unstable mind and the emotional afflictions associated with that, the misguided strivings in the outside world associated with that, the loss that's associated with the perishability of the ego-based experience. And so when you're bringing people to a deeper place that's unchanging and far more supportive and always there and requires faith, and that's a word I wouldn't have used a long time ago, faith and devotion, because that place inside, that deeper place, you can't see with your sensory organs. You can't touch it, you can't feel it. There's no faith involved that is there, that you can find and be with it. Then, you know, you're not going to go in that direction. So I still might see myself as a physician and a healer. It's never changed. So the intent actually is probably more pure than it was when I went into medical school.
Interesting. This relates also to another commonality we had back in, I think it must have been 79 when I was doing a presentation in Richmond. I think it was for the school system or something like that. I had you and Marty Albert and was Kent there?
Sam was probably there. Not Sam.
Sam. It was Sam.
Sam Corin. Yeah.
But there were four of us. Who?
Yeah. That was probably it. I remember Marty and Sam. I don't.
Both Marty and Sam were there. Yeah, and I had you guys talk about wellness, which, doctors talking about wellness. This was radical in the 70s, and that's why I picked you guys out. And then afterwards, we went back to my motel room, and
Yeah, I remember now.
we wound up sitting around. There was a candle. I don't know how we had why.
Yeah. Now you're bringing it back to me.
And somehow we wound up singing the Pachelbel canon as a round. I have no idea. Sam's probably the singer. I don't know. I should ask him how that happened. But I had this semi-transcendent experience with three other doctors that blew all my pictures of what doctors did when they got together, singing with a candle in a semi-darkened room. And we had the idea of, we should get together and do this more often. And you volunteered your place in Martha's Vineyard. We were going to have a meeting. I think it was in the spring of '80 or something like that. I went back to California. And somehow or other, it didn't happen. I know I wasn't able to make the date, and it didn't happen. And then eventually Kent got it together, and we met at Seven Oaks. Was it 83 or 84? And began Metadocs.
Yeah, it was before 84. It was, my marriage was still going on at that time. It was about 82, 83.
Uh-huh. I was still in Costa Rica, but I was back for a period. And so Metadocs evolved. And what's interesting is now the major focus of Metadocs is exploring what they're calling wet labs of psilocybin and ketamine, which has come a long way, baby, from our humble beginnings in Metadocs. So.
Well, I left Metadocs, as you might recall, because I got a little bit tired of hearing the same stories from everybody's life, month, year after year. So if it's taken a more inward turn beyond drama,
yeah,
I would love to come and visit one time.
Well, you were on one of the
Yes.
Zoom calls recently, and they're now doing more of those. I have dropped out too because I got tired of not going deeper, and remember some unpleasant words when I left at one point. But I've been actually to the meeting that Marty had up in Ashland last year, and I've been on a couple of the calls. But now there's a lot of interest in the response to the virus thing. Bill Thar's epidemiology background is kicking in, and they've been doing some support calls around that. I think they're doing them weekly now for a while, which it conflicted with one of my interviews with Larry Dossey last week, so I popped in for a little while at the end. But it's interesting how it's evolved to that interest and becoming a virtual group since the meeting got called off for next month, and they shut down Seven Oaks. So, yes, I think.
Yeah, I might go to the next one. I'm not so much interested in the virtual meeting. I think there's something about being with each other that makes a difference.
Yeah, well, this topic is overlapping with your interest, although I've been sidetracked with the virus pandemic. So what are your thoughts on the sudden cultural upheaval of this virus that, viewers 20 years from now will maybe have been a blip on the radar, maybe not. We don't know how it's going to unfold. But what are your thoughts?
Well, Krishna says to Arjuna, it's said on, you there?
Yeah.
I have to do something. I just lost a picture of you. Just lost your picture, John. I'm not sure how to get it back.
I think it's just your screen has gone to sleep. Touch a key and it'll probably pop back.
No, I touched something and it's.
Well,
you
can
see
fine, yeah. So
you can see me. It's fine. Yeah. I don't need to see you. Krishna says to Arjuna, I come to create worlds, to stabilize worlds, and to destroy worlds. I think what is most important for me, and that is not to at all romanticize the great suffering that a lot of people are going through, is to realize that again and again that everything in this world of a material nature, including body and ordinary mind, are perishable. Everything comes and goes. Stability, peace is an illusion in this day-to-day material world, this outer world. And all we're doing is coming in touch with the extraordinary illusion that everything that we've created, all the security and systems that we created can come apart. And now they're coming apart, and maybe everything will come back again. But they can also come apart and not come back again.
Mm.
And for me, it is this teaching in uh, perishability, temporality, the uselessness of investing one's attachments out in the outside world. This doesn't mean not working and doing things, not getting attached to that as the source of one's center. And so I see it as a time to teach. I'm doing that. I have had a group the other night on Zoom. I'll have a fairly substantial one tomorrow morning. But to teach meditation in a more deeper way, and not to stop at relaxation, and to help others see the teaching of impermanence.
Mm.
And that the only place we really can find this unchanging experience is within. And that isn't for me to teach anybody, because you're not going to believe it unless you experience it. But at least lead people in that direction, because the outer world is a wonderful place, but it's all temporary in all its forms. It's all vulnerable. It all fall apart in any moment and come to back again, and that could fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a tremendous teaching in it. There's also something I hear from friends and others, and again, this is not to romanticize the enormous suffering a lot of people are undergoing, but I hear a lot about people connecting in ways they didn't. I know I've been trying to get Zoom on the phone for a week. I can't get them on the phone. Obviously, people are beginning to go with Zoom. It's a wonderful thing. Connect online. But I also hear people's children connecting more. My children, who are pretty good, they call me more, even more now than they did before. Friends who are hearing from relatives they haven't heard from in years. So maybe something meaningful come out of this, maybe not. The tenacious mind in our usual outer world is very, very thick in its conditioning. So Maya can come again, market will go up, people feel secure and controlled, and who knows what's next. So it's this extraordinary teaching in impermanence and in vulnerability, in our lack of control, and in the value of heart and soul and spirit in life. Well, so that's what I see.
Yeah. Well, this has been enlightening and fun and good to see you, old buddy. It's been a while.
It's been a while. Maybe if there's another Metadocs at some point, if I'm around, I'll come and connect again with everybody as if we decide to go on the path of deepening.
Yeah.
That would be very nice.
Any other final words, or are we ready to wrap up?
Not really. I mean, I think it's all an ongoing process. I would never have known how this was going to unfold for me.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know what's going to unfold next week. And whatever that is, I can't get attached to it because it may not be there the week after. And so I'm learning to just be more present and to allow the contentment, the peace, the serenity, the compassion, the wisdom, the freedom that's just so naturally inside. And we talk about it, but unless you experience it, it's just a conversation. So allow that to guide my life, and have trust in that, and not trust in the guidance of my ego structure.
Well, it's been a joy over the years to witness much of this unfolding, albeit just little snapshots here and there, and have you put the thread together for us in this interview. But you're truly an amazing character, and have inspired many people. So thank you again for being on this journey and for sharing it with us. And we'll see what the next chapter is.
Well, thank you so much for your work over the years and the many people you inspired, even though those you inspired in the wrong direction, unfortunately. Because as you know, wellness has many understandings now. But your intention was
Yeah.
very deep and very rich, and I hold that in my heart, and I think it helped move the culture enormously.
Oh, well, it's been great, my friend. And I will look forward to seeing what the next chapter unfolds.
Take care.
So, bye-bye.